Let me say that I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and particularly in the congested way that we're going to have it today between 9:30 and 4 o'clock this afternoon, 5 o'clock. You're going to hear an awful lot. I have often felt that when I talk like this, that by the time I get through, I've told people just about everything I know. And I know it's hard on these youngsters to come. But I've told a story through the years of something happened to me in St. Louis when I was in a meeting and a lady had a little boy with her. And she came up to me one night and she said, I don't know what you're doing, but she said, I want to tell you that my little boy listens to every word you say. That he never takes his eyes off of you. And so I thought to myself, well, now I'm doing something good. That little boy is listening to everything I say. And she came up to me a little bit later on in the week. She said, I tell you, I figured out about my little boy. She said, when you were preaching tonight, he punched me and he said, Mama, is that the rifleman? So I had his attention all right, but I'm not sure how much good I was doing. Well, all right. In our time together at this hour, I'm going to talk with you about the book of Ecclesiastes. And I want to tell you that I think it's one of the most intensely practical books and one of the books that has the most to say to us today about living our lives that you can find in the Bible. The book of Ecclesiastes is really a book about living on this earth. It ends with a spiritual message, and we'll look at that message as we end the lesson. But it is primarily a book that talks about the question that is raised in verse 3 of chapter 1, what profit hath a man of all his labors, which he taketh under the sun? And so the question in the book of Ecclesiastes just is, what's the best way to live your life? And everybody has to think about that. And in fact, we all do think about it. And we all answer it. We all live our lives somehow. A lot of people may say, well, I never really thought about that. Well, whether you thought about it or not, you answer it. That is, everybody lives his or her life in one way or another. And the question that is asked in this book is one that I would just like to consider with you for about 30 minutes this morning, and that is, what's the best way to live your life? Now, there are a lot of people in the world today who would say, well, if you're going to raise a question like that, what should we be doing with our lives? The Bible is not a very good place to go to find the answer. There was a kind of a faddish school of theology a few years ago in the universities that was known as the God is dead theology. And I will tell you what those fellows said. They said, the God of the Bible is dead. He is no longer relevant to modern society because the Bible can't deal with modern man's problems. And I had people ask me questions like, what does the Bible have to say about air pollution? And what does the Bible have to say about traffic congestion? And I couldn't think of anything except maybe be ye angry and sin not. But let me tell you what's wrong with that thinking. And people will say, well, the Bible here, it was written by pre-modern, pre-technological people that didn't understand our problems. What can they tell me about how to live today? I'll tell you what's wrong with that. That misunderstands what my problems are. My problems are not air pollution and traffic congestion. Those are nuisances, but that's not really my problem. My problems are much more profound. I once talked with a really eccentric philosopher. He was very bright, but he was a strange man, and I got to be pretty good friends with him. And he said all kind of crazy things to me. But I remember one day we were sitting talking, and just out of the blue he asked me, he said, Ed, do you know the difference between a man and a dog? And I thought I could think of several differences, actually, like number of legs and tail and so on. But I said, no, what's the difference? He said the difference is a man knows he's going to die. Well, I want to tell you that is some difference. I mean, a dog is going to die. But a dog runs around all his life wagging his tail and he doesn't know he's going to die. But I know. I live my life in view of mortality. And that's my problem. I mean, if you want to talk about man's problems, I'll tell you what they are. Our problems are that we're going to die and we don't want to know what's going to happen to us. And we don't know where we came from. And we don't know why we're here. And we don't know what's going to happen to us after this life. And what I want to tell you is that this book answers those questions. And if you want to really know the answer to the question of what is life all about and what's the best way to live it, I believe that there are just so many answers that they are the same answers that are proposed in the book of Ecclesiastes. And that there is one answer that is far better than any other. Well, now let me tell you what I'm going to do this morning. I can find a number of different answers proposed in the book of Ecclesiastes to the question of what's the best way to live your life. I want to quickly suggest to you 3 of them that are suggested and discarded as inadequate, as vanity and vexation of spirit, and then propose to you a 4th answer that if you'll take it this morning and live your life in accordance with it, will give you a rich and full and good life with promise. Now the first answer is the one that we just read a moment ago in our reading. And what it suggests is one way you can go about trying to figure out what life is all about is you can say, well, I will use wisdom. And by wisdom, I will figure out what life is all about. And I'll learn all I can learn. And if there are any answers out there, surely that's the way to do it. But what I want to tell you this morning is that what the book of Ecclesiastes says, and what is just as true in 1988, is I don't care how much you learn, and I don't care who you ask, that you'll come to the end of your life not knowing the answers to any of life's consequently important questions. You will not know where you came from, and you will not know what's going to happen to you when you die, and you will not know why we're here. I don't care how many roads you chase down. Every time I read that verse 17 where he says, and I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, I think of another thing that my crazy philosopher friend said to me one time. We were talking and he said to me, just in the middle of nothing, he said, Ed, he said, I'll tell you what I've decided. He said, I have decided that the only people who understand life are crazy people. And that'll kind of make you stop and think. And I'll tell you what I've said through the years is what I thought about that some, and what gave a little bit of credence to it is if you'll just sit back and watch sane people for a while, you might get to thinking it is the crazy ones that understand life. I think that's what he says here, that I gave myself to know madness, folly, along with wisdom. That is, I looked at life every way you can look at it. And what I want to tell you is, it doesn't make any sense if all you have is your mind to deal with existence, then you won't come out with any kind of idea. Everything ends up being vanity and vexation of spirit. But quickly, let me move to the second answer. That is proposed in the book of Ecclesiastes and discarded because I really don't know many people who are trying to live their lives in accordance with wisdom. I don't know many people that spend much time seeking wisdom. I very rarely run into one at the university. And the fact of the matter is, most people are pursuing life in a pretty mindless way. And if you want a description of that, we can read it at the beginning of chapter 2. I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. And behold, this also is vanity. Now, if you want to know what the great American way of life is, this is it. If you want to know what life is all about, it is having fun. That's what life's all about. I mean, live it up and enjoy yourself. And that's the central message of television today, that if you're going to get anything out of life, what you need to do is drink it in with gusto and have a good time. Now, I want to tell you, I don't think most people do a very good job of that. Most people who say they're having fun actually aren't having much fun. I've said through the years, I am really sick of people telling me they're having so much fun when they come in and sit down around the coffee table on Monday morning and everybody says, oh, you ought to have been with us this weekend. I mean, we really had fun. Well, we went out and got dog drunk and painted the town red, and I mean, we had fun. And they're all sitting there, and they look like they're about to bleed to death from their eyes, you know, and they're like these cartoons where their heads are going to crack open. And I usually try to pound on the table and see if I can help that stuff. That's not fun. That's ignorance. And in fact, that's not even what is talked about here. And I want to tell you, young people, you need to see through that. That people out here in the world who say, oh, we're really having fun, and they're miserable. I mean, they're fighting, and they're arguing, and they're fussing, and they're sick, and they're hurting. They're not having fun. They're heaping misery on top of misery on themselves. And I will tell you that's an answer to what life's all about that's so unenlightened that I don't even believe it's discussed in the book of Ecclesiastes. Actually, what he's saying here is, if you want to try to figure out a way that made sense to say, I'm going to spend my life doing this, then one way somebody might say is, well, I'll just do as much as I can. I'll live life as fully as I can live it, and I'll do it with good sense. And that's what he says in verse 3, I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting mine heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under heaven all the days of their life. And what follows is that passage which I'm not going to read, in which he said, I did a lot of things. I made great works, and I made more money than anybody had ever made before, and I improved the livestock, and I built orchards, and I irrigated the fields, and I was great. I became a great man. Verse 11, then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. And there was no profit under the sun. Now let me tell you about your life. If you work hard and you do a lot of things, none of us are going to do as much as the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes. I mean, I used to think I was going to do some great thing. I can remember kind of thinking to myself, one of these days I will write a book and it'll be so important that people will be reading this book 200 years from now. And now I have written 6 books and nobody reads them now. So I doubt if that's going to happen. But what if you did? What difference would that make? That wouldn't make any difference. And it is so presumptuous for any of us to imagine that we're going to do something that would be important. I guarantee you, when you come to the end of your life, that you'll look on all of that and say that's vanity and vexation of spirit. Well, quickly, let me move to the third. I believe there's a third way that you can look at life that's proposed at the beginning of chapter 3 in the book of Ecclesiastes. Remember that interesting passage at the beginning of chapter 3 in Ecclesiastes that says, to everything there's a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together again. Remember that passage? I'll tell you what I believe that passage sets up. It sets up a third way that you can look at life, and that is you can say, what does life mean? Oh, it doesn't mean anything. It's just, we're just here. And we're born and we die. And we're happy and we're sad. One generation piles stones up in one place, and the next generation throws them away. One generation builds New York City. And time goes on, another generation will turn it back into sand dunes and sandspurs. And it doesn't mean anything. Now that's philosophically, that would be what is called existentialism. And that is to say that all life means is just the moment. And nothing means anything except that you're just here and you know it. And that's the materialist, the evolutionist view of life, that we're just animals and we evolved to the point where we can think about it. But it doesn't have any meaning. But now I want to tell you if that's true, that's the worst answer of all. And so he says at the beginning of chapter 4, so I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold the tears of such as were oppressed. And they had no comforter, and on the side of the oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Wherefore I praise the dead which are already dead, more than the living which are yet alive. Yea, better is he than both they which have not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that's done under the sun. Now suppose that's right. Suppose all there is to life is we're just here and there ain't anything we can do about it. And he says, what you do is look around and see all the bad things that happen. I mean, they're just little children dying. There are unexplainable things that happen. And there's a lot of sadness, trouble, and difficulty. And he said, if that's the way it is, then we'd be better off dead than alive. And in fact, he says, we'd be better off to have never been born and to have never seen all the evil that's done under the sun. Well, all right, now quickly I want to turn in my last few minutes to talk with you about the fourth answer, which I believe is the answer. You want to have a good life? You young folks, you want to have a good life? Let me tell you how to have it. Let's get the answer in front of us first. In the 5th chapter, and the first 2 verses, he says, keep thy foot when thou goest into the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and be not hasty to utter anything, for let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God, for God is in heaven, and thou upon earth, therefore let thy words be few. Now let me tell you the answer. You want to know what life is all about? I'll tell you what you need to do. You need to shut up and listen. I'll tell you what people do. You ask, well, what's the best way to live your life? What's life all about? Everybody starts talking. Nobody knows. Nobody knows where we came from. Nobody knows where we're going. Nobody knows what life's all about. And everybody's talking. And what he says here is you need to be quiet and listen. I used to have a friend that I'd talk with that I expect may be like a friend you have. I used to know a fellow that knew everything. I don't care what was under discussion. He'd tell you all about it. And one of my other friends characterized him and said, you know, Charlie's problem is he greets every question with an open mouth. And that was right. That's what Charlie did. And I tell you, that's what a lot of people do. And they do that about the profound. And what the book of Ecclesiastes says is, you will never know anything until you be quiet. And recognize that God's in heaven and you're on earth. And if I ever know anything about how to live my life, I'm going to have to listen to Him and let Him tell me. Well, if you do that, then I believe what we have before us is a way to put life in perspective, come what may. I believe in the first place that if we do that, what you'll have is you'll have a way to deal with life at its worst. And I'll tell you, sometimes life gets bad. And there's a lot of suffering in it. You young folks, I'll tell you what people will tell you sometimes. They'll tell you now, if you're a Christian, you're going to suffer. Well, I'll tell you more than that. If you're a human being, you're going to suffer. Everybody suffers. Everybody gets sick. Everybody sorrows. Everybody has pain. But a Christian is somebody that has a way to live with that. Ecclesiastes 5:8 says, "If thou seest the oppression of the poor, and violent perverting of judgment and justice in the province, marvel not at the matter, for he that's higher than the highest regardeth it. And there be higher than they." You ever see anything happen you don't like? Well, I do about 5:30 every night. All I have to do is turn the news on, and I guarantee you I'll see some things I don't like. Somebody will say that, there's a oil crisis, and the price of oil is going to go back up, and I'll say, well, I wish it wouldn't do that. But I don't know anything to do about that. I mean, I've thought about if you get an international crisis and we have the Cold War and everybody says, well, the Russians and the United States are in confrontation and it looks like we might have a nuclear war. What would you do about that? I thought, well, maybe what I need to do is sit down and write a letter to the Soviet Union, to Mr. Gorbachev, and say, now, if you guys really get mad with the United States, I wish you wouldn't shoot one of those missiles at Birmingham, Alabama, because it would inconvenience. But I don't know. I don't guess that'd do much good. And I'll tell you what, that could worry us, couldn't it? But if one gets their life in perspective with God at the head of it, what he says here, if you see the violent perverting of judgment, justice, and providence, marvel not at it. Because he that's higher than the highest regardeth him. There's somebody that's higher than that. He's higher than Gorbachev, Reagan. And the world may be out of my control, but it's not out of control. If I put God at the head of it, then I understand whatever happens, God rules. Now let me tell you, I believe that's true personally too. I'll tell you, there's a lot of personal tragedy in the world. And Christians are not above personal tragedy. I'll tell you a story. Something happened to me up in Decatur, Alabama years ago. I held a meeting up there, and I went to eat with a young couple. And later on in the week, some of the people in that congregation said, did they tell you about their little girl? And I said, no. And the story they told me was just the tragedy of tragedies. It's the worst story you can imagine. They had an 8-year-old little girl who had come home from school one day healthy, and the next morning was dead. And that mother said something that impressed me. And it impressed me once she got where she could say anything. She said, I don't understand it. All I can say is that heaven means more to me now than it ever could have meant before. Now little girls die, and they die in this country, and they die in other places. They die in the homes of Christians, and they die in the homes of people that aren't Christians. And there are all kinds of tragedies. And that's part of life. And you'll have to be prepared to live with it. But I'll tell you who's prepared to live with it better than anybody in the world. It's somebody that says, I'm going to let God rule in my life. And I'll listen to Him, and I'll put my life in His care. And however bad life gets, I believe I can live. But now I want to turn and talk with you particularly, you young folks particularly, for a few minutes about getting the good out of life. Because I also believe that there's a lot of good in life to be had, and that in many ways, the point of the book of Ecclesiastes is that if you want it, the way to do it is live your life with God at the head of it. A lot of people will tell you, oh, well, if you're a Christian, you may get some pie in the sky by and by, but you're going to miss life. I don't believe a word of that. I believe you get life. For instance, Ecclesiastes 2, verse 24, 25. There's nothing better for a man than that he should eat, and that he should drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hitherto more than I? Chapter 3, verse 22. Wherefore I perceive that there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for this is his portion. Now let me tell you something about life. God gives us a lot of good things. And if you put God as the head of your life, what you are is you're in a position to enjoy Him better than anybody in the world. That's exactly what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 6, when He said, don't chase life and be anxious about your food and your raiment and everything else, but rather understand that God knows you have need of those things, and be thankful for them and enjoy them. I want to tell you what most people spend their life doing is not living life, but chasing life. And Christians of all people ought to understand not to do that. That life is in the appreciation and thankfulness for the good things that we have. Let me tell you the worst thing television does. The worst thing television does in our society is not all that nastiness on it. Although that is bad, and we sure need to cut it off. But I'll tell you what's worse than that. Television sells you a set of values. It tells you what's good and bad. It tells you how to be happy. And the values it sells you are the values of some filthy-minded advertising man on Madison Avenue. I'll tell you what television teaches you. It'll teach you that the only way to be happy is to be young and to be rich and to be pretty. And I ain't any of those. And I never have been but one, and that was young. And so there's a whole lot of people that end up sitting around saying, oh, I'm not happy. What I want to tell you is that's not what makes you happy. Years ago when we first moved to Birmingham, I remember a day when I had all 5 of my children piled in the back of our station wagon. And we were riding along Cherokee Road. I don't know if you've ever been along Cherokee Road. But it's over in Mountain Brook, and it's all those huge mansions on both sides of the road. And as we rode along that road, all I could hear coming out back into that car was somebody saying, oh, look at that one up there. And somebody would say, ooh, look at that one down there. Looking at those big houses, you know. And so finally I said, I just imagine that all those people are the happiest people in Birmingham, don't you? But I doubt it. I imagine in most of those houses that the husband probably had stomach ulcers and the wife was alcoholic and all the children were hippies, and they probably weren't happy at all. And if they were happy, it wasn't because they're living in those houses, because that's not what makes you happy. And I want to tell you something about happiness. Happiness is in being able to appreciate the good things that you have. And I'll tell you something. You can just have so much. That's what it says in that verse I just read in Ecclesiastes 2. He says you can't enjoy but so much. I don't care. You may be the richest person in the world. You may have $50 million. But you can only do so much. I'll tell you, it's like he said, you can only eat so much. A fella have $50 million, he can't eat any more than I can eat, and I'm fixing to eat plenty in just a minute there. And as I frequently said, I've got enough to have all the country ham and grits that I can eat, and you can't do any better than that. And you may have a house with 40 bedrooms in it, but you can't sleep in but one at a time. And I got just as good a bed as anybody. And what we need to understand is that life doesn't consist in the things that you have, but it consists in our thankful enjoyment and appreciation of the things that we have. And that's exactly the position that we ought to be in. I'll tell you, boys and girls, don't let somebody send you off chasing illusions that are not real, but rather be thankful for the good things you have and enjoy them and give God the praise. And I'll tell you this, my father was a physician. He was a great old Christian fellow, but he didn't have a romantic bone in his body, and he was a real short-spoken, blunt-spoken man. But I can never remember, as I was growing up, I could never remember my dad talking with me about courting or anything like that. Except one time, we were riding along in the car, and he turned over to me and he said, "Son," he said, "I just got one thing to tell you about getting married." He said, "When you get married," he said, "don't marry one of those skinny little sickly ones. Get you a great big healthy one." Well, let me tell you something about that. If you boys and girls can get you a big healthy wife, if you boys can, and if you can have a good job, make a good living, and get enough to eat, and if you can have a family, and if they honor you, they'll serve the Lord, that's life. That's the best there is. That's all you can have. And you can look at all that glitter and glamour on television. But if you follow that, you'll miss life. Because God gives us life if we just put God in His place. Well, the end of the matter is that if you do that, what you also position yourself for is for God to give us promises of everlasting life as well. And the end of the book of Ecclesiastes says that what we need to do is the conclusion of the whole matter is to fear God and keep His commandments. And that this is the whole duty of man. And that God will bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. And I'll tell you, if you put God at the head of your life, what it finally will do is it'll mean when you come to the end of your life that you not only will have had the best that there is here, but that you'll have the promise that there are those works that you can take with you that God will bring into judgment. If you're in this audience and you're not a Christian, we'd urge you to be one this evening, or this morning. And what I want to tell you is that I believe that it'll allow you to appropriate the very best that there is here. But more than that, what it'll do is it'll give us a hope for the forgiveness of our sins. It'll give meaning to our lives in the hereafter. If you're subject to the invitation, if you're here and you believe Jesus was the Son of God, and we can encourage you this morning to come confess that, repent and be baptized, then we'd urge you to do it. Or if you're here and as a child of God, you've wandered away, lost your direction, you need to repent, come back and pray.